Welcome to session 3 of the Spectrum Institute for Teaching and Learning, Broadening the Spectrum of Teaching Styles Through Global Coalition workshop series. We're very happy to have you. Today, we will be hearing 2 different presentations. Our first presentation will be given by Dr. Dario Colella, who's a professor at the University of Salento in Italy. He will be giving the presentation with Domenico Monacis.
Monacis.
Monacis, okay, who is studying at the University of Foggia in Italy as well.
Yeah, Foggia.
Foggia, okay. And they will be presenting the learning of motor competencies and teaching styles, analysis of the physical education teacher's behavior in secondary school. And they have about 25 minutes to give their presentation. We'll have a couple minutes for questions after, and then our second presentation will be given by Doctors Simonton and Kanae Haneishi. So I would like to turn the floor over to Dario and Domenico. You can go ahead and share your screen whenever you'd like.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, and good morning or good evening, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to be here. So I'm Domenico Monacis, PhD at the University of Foggia, and today I will present a study conducted in southern Italy about the analysis of physical education teachers' behavior in secondary school. But just a little bit about us, I will share my presentation with Dario Colella, a full professor in theory and methodology of human movement at the University of Salento, while I will become a researcher in methods and didactics of motor activities at the University of Foggia in southern Italy. Our research address our aim to studying the spectrum of teaching styles related to the physical education and motor skill learning and motor competence, methods and didactic of motor activities related to the motor development, level of physical activity, and the factor related to the practice of physical activity in childhood and adolescence, even through the integration of technologies such as exergame or active video game. So, starting from what we know about spectrum, the choice of the teaching style, not only what to do, but also how to make the student do, could have a strong impact on the learning processes and on interdisciplinary and transversal educational aims. So the motor skill learning and motor competence development and physical literacy require the interaction of teaching styles to personalize teaching interventions and solicit different learning methods. And the motor in Italy, the motor competence has a complex structure, and it is composed of different and complementary factors. When we talk in Italy about the motor competence, we refer to the use of motor skills, knowledge, and refers to the close and strong relationship between knowledge, know-how, and the ability to produce a certain movement. And so it expresses the integration of knowledge, motor skills, and attitude expressed in a given context and on the basis of the personal skills. So in Italy, we have competence-based didactic. And our aims, the aims of the present study, will describe a research action study conducted in southern Italy aimed at sharing a repertoire of teacher behaviors specific for each teaching style and identify the relationship between the descriptor of teacher behavior and motor learning to design different teaching learning situation in the school setting. So the study was conducted on and involved 47 physical education teacher, and it involved the analysis and sharing of a teaching style model through the research action. And the research action have the duration of 10 meetings for 2 hours for each meeting. And the question of the training course where how to propose a motor task to promote different way of learning and how to request differentiated motor tasks and promote the variability of the practice, which questions are related to the teaching styles of production or reproduction and generate convergent or divergent motor answers. So after this 10 meeting, during this 10 meetings, we asked to the physical education teacher with almost 10 years of service in secondary school to provide a list of the descriptors for a list of descriptor of the teacher behaviors for each teaching styles. And the result are the following. So for common styles, according to physical education teacher, the physical education teacher should present the motor task and the organizational modalities and communicate the specific aim of that motor task, indicates the number of repetitions, intervals, duration, as well as the beginning at the end of the performance or motor task that is equal for all, demonstrates and implementing rules and specifies the use of tools, requires an execution of the task in time, and communicates the criteria of success of the related motor task, and correct the error mainly indirectly. According to the practice styles, the physical education teacher should present motor tasks and communicating the teaching aims and objective, prepares the organizational modalities and spaces in terms of individual tasks, pairs, paths, relay, circuits in which the use of small tools is also foreseen. Organize the organization of subgroups, indicates the implementing procedures, the numbers of repetition, the intensity, and the difficulty of the motor task, shares the success criteria of that specific motor task, and corrects the error directly and indirectly. According to reciprocal style, the physical education teacher should communicate objective and learning aims, presents the skill criteria on which to practice, indicates the implementing rules, prepares the organizational modalities and the operating spaces, prepares the organization of couples and subgroups, and indicates how to communicate feedback to other students. According to the self-check styles, the physical education teacher should present motor tasks and communicate the objective, prepares the organizational modalities, the operating spaces, the data registration sheets, and indicates the executive and organizational procedures, communicate the skill criterion on which to practice and compare the results, use the metacognitive process, such as a reflection on the learning paths, the difficulties, and the progress made and the result achieved. On the right, we ask for each teaching styles, but in particular for these teaching styles, we ask the teacher to provide a list of which metacognitive processes were enhanced by the use of these teaching styles, such as what requires how quickly did I learn these skills? In this period, what skill did the students learn? Previously, the student could perform this movement, but now, and so on. According to the inclusion styles, the physical education teacher behavior descriptor are relating to the presentation of the executive and organizational modalities according to different levels of difficulty intensity, increasing or reducing the number of executive variants and the use of tools, as well as the adaptation of the motor tasks through the executive variants, communicate the relationship between motor skills, performance requests, and motor skill related, and correct the error directly and indirectly. While, according to production styles, in this case the guided discovery style, the physical education teacher should recall motor skills already learned by the student, propose a motor task and ask questions about possible spatial and temporal quantitative executive variants, and relating also to the use of tool and space, proposes a motor task and solicits the discovery or analogies and differences with other tasks, tools, activities, requires the repetition of the motor task without repeating the same task, and communicates to the students question and or descriptive feedback. According to the convergent and divergent discovery style, the physical education teacher should present the task and the motor field, propose the execution of a motor task, and use open, divergent, or convergent motor responses, asks questions and solicits open and or closed motor answers, varying through the variation of the degree of freedom from a more open or closed motor answers, propose motor tasks within space-time constraints, and communicates to the students question or descriptive feedback. While, according to the convergent learner design individual program style, the physical education teacher should communicate the aims, present the organizational areas, motor tasks and equipment, and organize an educational settings, as well as records motor skills and the disciplinary areas, interacts with the students indicated in a success criteria, and communicates descriptive feedback. According to the self-teaching styles, the physical education teacher should present the characterized themes related to physical education, motor activity, sports, and motor skills for the training and well-being of the person, communicates the aims and indicates the educational paths to promote the learning of motor skills, health education, and active lifestyles, education to social science, propose research and the study of documents on the relationship between motor activities, fitness, correct eating habits and behavior, and disease prevention, and present the intrinsic meanings and values of body expression through motor activities, play, and sports. The results of our study can be summarized as follows. So the definition of the descriptors of teachers' behavior has made possible to analyze the motor task, rebuild the ways to propose the motor tasks and propose the specific motor task in different ways, deduce the learning methods of mainly stressed students, analyze the factors of motor competence mainly involved according to the teaching styles with which that motor tasks were proposed, and identify the way in which the teaching mediation is carried out. So a lot of significant importance was given to the students' behavior because through the variation and the variability of the teaching style and using the spectrum of the teaching styles, the teachers can allow the students to discover several modes of execution mediated and discovered by mediated and guided by the teacher himself, and discover motor solution and different ways to perform a certain motor skills according to the problem and the question that were asked by the teacher. So in this study, we ask also to the teacher to describe what component motor competence does the teachers want to develop using the spectrum of teaching styles. And there are several factors such as motor skills, motor ability, level of physical activity, enjoyment, motivation, health education, knowledge, socialization, and perceived self and motor competence. So for enhance the didactic, the competence-based didactic in Italy, this study show how the different ways of learning can be enhancing and promoted through the questions that the teacher asks and reflect the way in which the motor task is required by teacher. So in conclusion, this study underlined showed that the necessity to reorient the training process, the training processes of teachers training at school and at the university, a core university curriculum toward a shared syllabus about the spectrum and involving the spectrum of teaching styles. At school, they need to highlight not only the content, but the modalities of proposal, the context and the relationship for a specific motor task in terms of how to say and how to communicate, qualitative research on teaching styles and the motor task analysis, and postgraduate education for university students, and the observation and analysis of the teaching through the descriptors of teachers' behavior allows to reconstruct and the methodological profile of teacher and the learning processes requested in the students. The use of description promotes a sort of reflective teaching, and the reflecting teacher reflects on the choice of context, area, and methods of communication, the quality of students' responses, and the formation of groups and subgroups, and highlighting aims and different ways of learning. Some references that we use for our study, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, Domenico. Does anyone have any questions for Domenico and his presentation?
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So, Domenico, thank you. That was a great presentation. When you were describing the teacher's reflection, would they go teach and then read the descriptors and reflect, or did they read the descriptors on the styles before they went and actually tried the style?
Both of them. So the teacher reflection can be ensured by the analysis of the teaching styles, the main characteristics of each teaching styles, and generate a list of descriptors of teaching behaviors for that teaching styles, but also on the reverse. So starting for the descriptors of the teaching behaviors and then link them to the appropriate and specific teaching styles. But there is a reflection on about the way in which the motor task is proposed, or starting from the motor task itself. So, for example, when teacher in the gym propose the volley, they or some skills related to volleyball, they can reflect the starting for the motor task and then reflect about the motor descriptors after they can starting for the motor task and then reflect on about how to propose that motor task. I don't know if I was clear in my answer.
Yes, you were. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Domenico. Autumn, I can take over from here. Apologies from the delay. Once again, I was a victim of change of time in the Eastern Coast, and I was in front of my computer, but not opening a Zoom session. Anyway, thank God you did that. So we can continue from here. So our second presentation today is from Dr. Kelly Simonton and Dr. Kanae Haneishi. And the title is Pre-Service Teachers' Perceptions of Training and Using the Spectrum of Teaching Styles and its Role in Their Pedagogical Readiness. If I'm correct, Kelly and Kanae are collaborating in a project that the Spectrum Foundation and Institute has already funded. So it would be nice to hear from you guys. The audience is yours.
Thank you all for being here. Autumn, can you see the slide okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So thank you for that introduction. We're excited to be here, and thanks everybody for being here today. As Nico said, my name is Dr. Kelly Simonton, and I'll be presenting alongside Dr. Haneishi and representing some of our research team, Amy and Selena from the university, and we'll be focusing on pre-service teacher perceptions of the spectrum. So we know over the last several decades that teaching physical education and training teachers to teach physical education has evolved quite significantly and really shifted from a one-size-fits-all or the dreaded roll out the ball strategies to more evidence-based strategies, a more diverse set of instructional approaches and models-based practices. However, there's still a consistent inability for teachers overall, the research suggests, to implement and adopt many of these more contemporary styles. And we see trends more for those traditional teaching approaches or those teacher-centered didactic approaches. And this is true in the use of the spectrum of teaching styles as well. Despite the strong evidence that pedagogical diversity is essential for student learning, for engagement, motivation, and achievement, we really see more of those traditional styles or teacher-centered styles be the predominant force in classrooms. We believe the spectrum of teaching styles is particularly important, not only for those reasons for student learning, but the fact that the knowledge of the spectrum really shows an enhanced pedagogical expertise of physical education teachers and a way to unlock models-based practices, which you'll notice in our presentation is an important part of the university curriculum in this particular study. The inconsistency, though, of those not seeing those evidence-based strategies is typically chalked up to the lack of knowledge, attitudes, the context, and general beliefs about what teaching and learning is. So in order to prepare PE teachers to have the knowledge and dispositions that it requires or is necessary to adopt and embed the spectrum, for example, within the toolbox of a pedagogical repertoire of a PE teacher or a future PE teacher, it really appears that more research is still needed. So I want to highlight the spectrum figure here that you see on the screen, not to tell this particular audience what the spectrum of teaching styles is, but to provide a framework to really show the multiple strategies that are provided within the spectrum, and each of which that can elicit and have a unique supportive instructional process for unique learning goals within physical education and within other teaching areas. Teachers can be trained to identify the learning goals required for their students and find alignment between which strategies they want to use or that best lend themselves to reaching the student learning goal that they have set for that day or for that particular episode. And so really learning how to base the selection of teaching strategies based on the needs of their learners. We all know that the spectrum really focuses on episodic teaching, which means that there's multiple styles that need to be selected likely within any given single lesson plan and certainly within any type of physical education unit. In addition, we'd like to note that models-based practices can be unlocked and will be prominently related to the spectrum of teaching styles because of so many different uses of styles that really allow the models-based practices to come to fruition. And you'll notice that as we talk in our current study as well. So overall, we really just want to show this figure to highlight the complexity and the depth that's truly needed to understand the spectrum and to utilize it effectively. And given the depth and complexity of the spectrum, it should inform us about what approaches we should be taking with pre-service teachers. We know that the data suggests that simply knowing what the spectrum is or seeing examples of it is not enough to adopt it and use it. There's much more to it. So what do we know so far? Well, a great deal of research, as Domenico pointed out in his presentation, really shows research is effective in improving student learning experiences, K through 12. We also have seen a myriad of research on in-service teachers, how they adopt and how they use the spectrum of strategies over the last several decades. However, there's been a general limited amount of research for pre-service teachers and how their training and development on the spectrum has really prepared them to use the spectrum once they leave their teacher education program. So what we do know, though, so far is that in-service and pre-service teachers tend to rely on reproductive styles of teaching. They find them a bit easier, and these strategies like command and practice are really in more alignment with teacher-centered approaches, which has been the traditional view that many of these pre-service teachers have seen physical education, how they understand physical education during their acculturation phase. We also know that pre-service teachers require early exposure for them to feel and gain confidence in using the spectrum. However, there's been really limited investigation on the long-lasting effects of transitioning from teacher development into their early career. And importantly, the mental schemas that we're going to talk about in our study have really shown that the naive and limited understanding of the teaching and learning process of pre-service teachers has limited their ability to adopt and utilize the spectrum beyond what's required of them in coursework. And so that acculturation phase that pre-service teachers, or that acculturation phase has impacted how pre-service teachers enter the physical education teacher program, but also their professional schemas and understanding of what teaching and learning is really tend to limit their ability to adopt the spectrum. So how do we get pre-service teachers to gain the knowledge beliefs in a way that they would adopt the spectrum moving forward? We want to draw your attention and highlight 4 critical studies that we identified in the literature that sort of served as a framework and lens to explore this idea more in-depthly. Pill and colleagues suggest that foregrounding techniques in and with the spectrum are needed to challenge that naive and limited professional knowledge and the identities that many pre-service teachers hold. Foregrounding all of their pedagogical experiences during the teacher education process and embedding them specifically in the spectrum and the assumptions that align with the spectrum help provide pre-service teachers a better understanding of the goals tied to teaching and learning. And it forces pre-service teachers to reconsider what is the purpose in teaching and learning, which includes planning, organizing, and actually giving an instruction to their learners. So they have to reconsider, and it requires them to understand at a deeper level what is student learning. Pill and his colleagues refer to this process as pedagogical accountability for pre-service teachers. And we found that really important for our study, is that we wanted to hold pre-service teachers more accountable to using the spectrum because of that emphasis on teaching and learning. Similarly, Sempris, Digalitis, and others, they point out the personal beliefs of pre-service teachers, including their epistemological and ontological perceptions. So essentially, how do they view the students' teaching and learning process, and how do they understand specific strategies in reaching particular learning goals? How does that dictate how they view teaching and learning, and what role does the spectrum of teaching styles play as pre-service teachers develop their knowledge of what it means to be a teacher and to have pedagogical skills? So they refer to these ideas as the mental model of pre-service teachers. And as we pointed out earlier, pre-service teachers consistently hold misconceptions about teaching and learning. And so shifting their mental model over time is really necessary in order for them to potentially adopt the spectrum of teaching styles within their pedagogical repertoire. So with that being said, the main purpose of our study was not necessarily to test a prescribed process of learning about the spectrum, but more to explore the process of how pre-service teachers construct their knowledge and awareness about the spectrum, as well as is there a potential ability to shift their mental processes using these foregrounding techniques that Pill and colleagues suggested. So I'll give you a second there. I don't want to read from the slide. So if you want to see those research questions that kind of grounded that study, I'll give you just a minute. So for this particular study, we had 34 pre-service teachers from 2 universities here in the Western US, predominantly in their 3rd and 4th year, or juniors and seniors, kind of how we reference them in the US. And we asked them at the beginning stages of the study, what type of knowledge and experience did they have previously of the spectrum? And we had about 68% of the students say they had some knowledge, not a lot, but some of the spectrum, which was predominantly those 4th year students who had seen a little bit of the spectrum in their pre-service teacher development, but approximately 30% had no experience or knowledge of the spectrum before this study began. I want to highlight the foregrounding techniques that we utilized at our university, which include reflecting on their K-12 experience as a former student. What was the teaching and learning experience like for them? We hosted a series of spectrum lectures on understanding what is the spectrum of teaching styles, what is the umbrella, what are the different strategies, what are the different styles. And then we provided practical workshops where the pre-service teachers would actually go physically do the styles. And then we shifted to them planning and implementing teaching episodes within lessons with K-12 students. So they went out into schools and practiced those styles themselves. And then they did a series of reflection processes after implementing the styles. And so each student did at least 2 to 3 episodic teaching episodes. There was actually several and did quite more, but a minimum of 2 to 3 out in the schools. Of the students, all 34 of the pre-service teachers completed both the pre and post survey and did the teaching training and the teaching implementation. And we had about 15 of the students specifically do one-on-one interviews as part of this process. So you can see we used an exploratory mixed methods design to really learn about depth and potential change in students. From a quantitative perspective, we used Kalina and Cothran's teacher perceptions survey, which provided each student a scenario for each of the teaching strategies. And then they would rank a multi-item survey on the perceived usefulness of that style, as well as a single item measure of their perceived ability of using that style based on the scenario they were provided. And then, of course, we did a series of lesson reflections, recorded lessons, and one-on-one interviews based on the construction of their knowledge during this time. Not to go into too much detail, I want to move forward, but here's a basic breakdown of our data analysis. We used a repeated measures Mancova for the survey to see if any potential changes happened from the beginning to the end of the semester for the pre-service teachers. And then you can see the series of inductive and deductive analysis we completed on both the reflection, the open-ended responses, and the interviews that we conducted with that subset of students. I'm just going to talk real briefly about the quantitative results, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Haneishi. So we did not do all of the styles. We only did styles A through H, and you can see we broke them into reproductive and productive clusters. We didn't do I, J, and K just because the context that we worked in really didn't lend itself for students to actually implement. Those styles are a bit more complex for pre-service teachers, and the teachers that we were usually working with, it didn't really set up well. So we really focused on styles A through H, and here's what I want to draw your attention to. You can see that the mean scores from pre to post on almost all of the teaching styles went up, which means the students really gained they found the styles to be more useful, the more understanding and the more experiences they had with them overall. There weren't any statistical significant differences on the useful scale. However, when we look at the perceived ability scales, the single item scales on each style, I want to highlight styles A, B, and F, which we actually saw statistical significant improvements in the mean scores of their ability for those styles. So overall, the mean scores improved across the semester, and we even saw some statistical improvements in their perceived ability to implement a few of those strategies. And I'll share more about that after, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Haneishi for our qualitative results.
Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. My name is Kanae Haneishi. I am from the Western Colorado University in the United States. So now I am sharing the result from the interview part of the research. So after analyzing the qualitative part of that data, we have determined the 4 main themes. The first theme was early and frequent experiences using the spectrum is essential. So early stage of the teacher education in their PEAT program, the spectrum helped pre-service teachers to break down the lesson, had rewarding experiences, and feel more confident in their teaching. And the second main findings was that pre-service teachers want and need more opportunities to implement various spectrum styles in hands-on setting, such as peer teaching and field teaching. The quote was, I think the best way to learn is to practice. So I like my instructor to give me more opportunities to try out the different styles as a teacher. So this way I can get a sense of what it is like to teach the style. Learn student might respond and reflect on ways to better implement each style after practicing. And then the third theme was that pre-service teachers expressed their needs for more support in understanding alignment and connecting teaching goals, such as lesson objectives, with certain styles. So they have deeper understanding of when it is appropriate to use each style. The theme 4 was, we found a clear development and the confidence as a teacher using spectrum from a 3rd year to 4th year of pre-service teaching. So it was good to see that pre-service teachers are feeling much more comfortable using spectrum and finding it useful as they had a deeper understanding of the styles. And then the last theme was some pre-service teachers were finding clear connection embedding the spectrum styles within the curriculum models that they were learning in PEAT program. So here are some quotes. The first quote was, "We use game-based approach like almost every time, and it worked really well with teaching style 2. Style F, guided discovery, was the one I like to use a lot more than others, just because it really let students figure it out by asking questions and learn for themselves rather than me telling them what to do and then get them to understand. I like Style F helped me with game-based approach because it allowed for kids to critically think and be strategic during the games. So by asking questions that would provoke that type of thinking was really beneficial." So these are the example quotes connected to this theme 5. So based on what we found from these results, here are some discussion points that we pointed out. So the first one is the foregrounding techniques. And first discussion point was related to what Kelly has introduced, is the foregrounding techniques and the impact of mental models. So the first one is early and frequent experiences, learning and using the spectrum styles in field placement were essential. So pre-service teachers' emotions before, during, after played a significant role in how they interpreted the success of their implementation of each styles. And intentionally using the spectrum helped them to organize the teaching and make it easier, so which leads to their confidence and comfortableness they're going into their teaching. So knowing what to do and how to teach each part of the lesson prior to going into the lesson. And then also the PEAT programs must utilize field experience for planning, practicing, and the reflection of the spectrum. So mental models and the naive perspectives will only shift through experience and then reflection of their teaching performance, and then the accountability for the student learning. And then in terms of the mental process of pre-service teachers with using a spectrum in terms of their confidence and the comfortableness. So learning spectrum of teaching styles, few styles at a time, and having a deeper understanding of each style were just to be helpful for pre-service teachers. So it is more beneficial for pre-service teachers to learn, instead of learning all the styles at the same time, learn a few styles at a time with content learning and then being demonstrated, the demonstrations and then application of each styles. And then learning happens in the developmental stages, which is connected to the mental model of teaching and the goals in PEAT programs. And then lastly, the viewing the spectrum as a part of the teaching, as opposed to in addition to teaching, it was important. So as we found the connection to the model-based practices were obvious to some students, not obvious to the others, those were the important points. So the conclusion from our study was the spectrum can be used for pre-service teachers' intellectual accountabilities. So make it accountable to use each styles to make their teaching and then lessons more effective. And then foregrounding the need for spectrum and adjusting and then changing their mental model of a student must be done sequentially. The spectrum was essential to teaching and the planning and the organizing. And then additionally, the field experience with spectrum, especially the K-12 settings, was the biggest impact, including the reflection and the retrying stage of the field learning. So it is important to give students more opportunities to implement and reflect and retry. And then additionally, learning the spectrum takes time. So it is important to teach a few styles at a time. And then when teaching the spectrum, it is important to align with developmental capability of pre-service teachers And then also it is important to align with model-based practices and then content for easy connections. For the future research, it is beneficial for the PEAK program to create a systemic framework for teaching spectrum, meaning that like how we should teach spectrum teaching styles within our PEAK program by outlining some phases and stage of knowledge and practices, and by developing the foregrounding and the mental model tracking within stages. And we also need to continue discussing how spectrum fits into the current model-based practices in physical education, which connected to the previous presentation we had at the previous workshop. And then the spectrum provides guideline, the framework of how PEAK programs should view teaching the curriculum to transform the perception of how physical education lessons should look like. And oftentimes, like Kelly said, based on their own traditional experiences into quality physical education. And then to become more confident about their ability to teach, and then to implement each curriculum models more effectively because they can break down the model with spectrum styles and organize the lesson easier and better. So that concludes our presentation of our research. And we like to, once again, I express our appreciation of the support from the Spectrum Institute to conduct this research. This was the part of the Spectrum of Research grant from last year. And then without that support, we weren't able to execute this research and then, cooperate from two different organizations. So once again, we'd like to express our appreciation from the support. Thank you. So anyone have any questions? We are opening up that to the floor.
Okay, thank you, Kanae and Kelly. Very interesting presentation. Any comments or questions for Kanae or Kelly? Okay, may I set one question?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Many of us have used the same tools of measurement and probably similar methods, quantitative or qualitative here. So we are all familiar with the measures you used. It's always interesting to investigate and examine the processes of how people make decisions, for example, and in this case, how pre-service teachers make decisions. I was just wondering, and I'm talking about mostly the qualitative part of your work now. I have no idea if you examined this, but I'm just asking, are you able to say that there are different, let's say, levels among the students you were teaching? Levels or phases, I mean, just to put it simpler. Yeah, can you comment on
Yes. Yeah, so we had two kind of cohorts of PEAK students. The fourth years would be kind of the more advanced who had been in the PE program longer. They're on the doorstep of getting ready to go student teach, which in the US and our universities at the final stage before graduation. And then there was a second group that was in their third year. So they were just beginning pre-service teacher methods types of classes. And I'll let Kanae speak further, but I will say it was really easy to see the comfortability in the fourth year students who had received 2 or 3 semesters of background of the spectrum and teaching practice. Their viewpoint on what the spectrum provided them was much more in support of making lessons better. But the first years, or the third years, I guess is a better way because that's what we called them, they were much more stressed. They were much more anxious in their first attempts of trying the spectrum. And really, they were seeing the spectrum, particularly, I can think of 2 students of mine, they were seeing the spectrum as this other thing on top of planning a lesson, as opposed to it being an essential piece of planning the lesson. And so that caused a little bit of stress. So their developmental levels of comfortability in planning and executing were quite different in those 2 time points.
Yeah, and in addition to that, in my university, I have more on like the older side of the student too. And then what quite interesting, and then I was happy to see was that older students were able to see how each of the spectrum teaching styles were able to not only like help them organize and plan their lessons, but also like they were able to see the bigger picture of how each styles are fitting into the curriculum models that we use, and they were taught to be used. So I was pleased to see, okay, so they were able to see, because I think that this has been our discussion within this kind of spectrum profession to see, okay, how this spectrum teaching styles fitting into these model-based practices. And then we were able to see from especially the older students, that the spectrum was helpful for them to break down each lessons within those model-based teaching.
Okay, thank you, Kanae and Kelly. But let me continue with the question. You've said that the main difference was between the fourth and third year, correct? So the background of the students, which was different, wasn't so, it didn't have much impact, if I got it correctly. So
Sorry, Nikos. There were some definite differences, and I think that's why Kanae and I really felt like the developmental level of the pre-service teachers needs further consideration in terms of which styles are they learning first or second, when those styles are happening, are they in alignment with the models like Kanae has mentioned. But really, if you think of, like, for us, the pre-service teachers really, it's much easier for them to learn like fundamental skill teaching, like the skill theme approach or model. When they first start their PEAT program, they really find that model is like, it makes sense to them, it's easier. And then once they're 2 or 3 semesters in, when you introduce like the sport education model or the sport-based model, that becomes a little easier for them once they've got some of those basic skills figured out. So there's like a developmental stage that we saw that the third years were a little bit more open to the quote unquote easier styles, or the styles that seem to align more with what they viewed teaching and learning. But when the styles became more complex or more student-centered, which is in misalignment with their traditional views of teaching, those complex styles became a little harder for them. And so introducing to them too quickly to those types of styles might be problematic. They might not be ready for it. So I do think there are some slight differences between the two groups and their developmental ability to think about their pedagogies. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah. So I think I think that's why it's very important to like consider when you are implementing teaching styles, which teaching style you're introducing is aligned with the mental models that Kelly was talking about. You know.
Okay, thank you. There are absolutely more questions that one could discuss here, but I would like to ask again if anybody wants to comment or ask something.
I saw earlier it looked like Jamie unmuted for a second and then remuted as soon as you started talking. I don't know if he had a question.
Yes, Jamie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly and Kanae, for your presentation. My question was going to be, okay, what's next then? How do you envision this growing or envision building on this work?
Can I do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. We haven't, talked to each other, but for my perspective, I think it's like, okay, what's the best way to teach or introduce spectrum teaching styles in the PEAT program? So we have, the PEAT student here. Then what's the best way to teach or introduce when we have our pre-service teachers, so they can actually have a deeper understanding of it, and they will implement, and then they can improve their teaching performance. I think that's more like our overall goal of, okay, how do you introduce, like, which styles at the time? So that's why in the conclusion, we have, okay, maybe we should create some sort of a framework for the PEAT program to see. This might be as an example, this might be an easier way or effective way to teach. I don't think we should go from A through, like A, B, C through, maybe like we should go A, B, and then go through C or something. I don't know, based on our theories and findings, based on the research. But I think it will be useful if we can create some sort of a framework for the PEAT teachers to see, okay, when you are teaching spectrum teaching styles, let's teach this way so we can effectively actually teach the spectrum of teaching styles. Particularly in the United States, the model-based practice is so embedded into PEAT program. So like a lot of teachers and scholars are looking for, okay, how we can, teach the spectrum of teaching styles within those curriculums. So developing the framework will be the interesting part. What do you think, Kelly?
I agree 100%. I'll just supplement that to say, Jamie, I think that there's probably 3 to 5 particular things that need to be done to do this effectively. I think you have to understand the student's mental model, which is their acculturation. Like OST provides a lot of great information, but applying OST, I think we haven't done a good job of. This is a prime example, I think, that understanding what students have experienced coming into the program, starting with bridging the gap with styles that they're familiar with, and then starting to expose them to the styles maybe they're less familiar with. When students said, oh yeah, my teacher did that with us before, they were way more willing to like adopt it, and it's attractive to them because they had some sort of reference point. So I think understanding that and then tracking the students' reflections and mental models across time are really, really critical. It was interesting because Kanae brought up the emotion piece. If a student tried a style and they had a negative experience, meaning it didn't work right away, or their K-12 students didn't get it, they felt like maybe the style doesn't work. So having them reflect and try it again and improve and try that strategy and keeping track of where they're seeing the importance of the style and seeing how it's working, I think is essential for them to adopt them. And I also think in alignment with the models-based practices. So like here at Wyoming, we start with a skill theme approach. We transition to educational games. We transition to tactical games, TPSR, and then sport ed. And so we try to embed, given those are the models we cover across our 4 semesters with students, we tried to pick specific styles that we think align most closely with those models-based practices. So then they're having success because the style kind of aligns with the model working when they're out doing it with students. I have like 3 or 4 other thoughts, but I don't want to keep going. But I think a more delicate process on those phases and tracking and keeping track of where the pre-service teachers is essential for them to actually, if our thing is we want them to adopt this and use it, I think we have to be more deliberate and intentional in that way.
Yeah, and then accountability, like that we talk about, make them accountable to like implement and reflect and try it,
Thank you.
There's some great discourse going on in the chat. I don't want to read it all out, but I would check that out because there were a couple questions asked and answered in chat. So that was really nice.
Yeah, I think there are some comments on the chat in relation with the preference of particular teaching styles. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Kelly and Kanae.
I think our findings aligned with previous research in many ways, that the pre-service teachers felt more comfortable with styles A and B, and even C to a degree. C is a little bit difficult because they have to train the students how to interact with one another. But Kanae brought up a really good point in the results. Style F really stuck out, and we saw statistical improvement in perceived ability for style F. And I think that was because both Kanae's program and ours has a games-based or tactical model approach in which students are going to be rewarded. The model's going to work more effectively if they can use divergent discovery, guided discovery, those types of questioning as teaching processes. So it was interesting to see that when we forced them to use the styles, they were successful in the models, then their perceptions of their ability to use that style improved. So there was kind of a jump to the connection to the models that Kanae had mentioned. So I agree, Robin, you're exactly right. Like the practice style and reciprocal style, it's a little easier for them. But I do think when we pair the styles with a model, those particular styles can really show improvement as well.
Then vice versa, the teaching styles help them to execute the curriculum models better, because they help, the teaching styles help them break down the models too.
A limitation to that is we noticed with our cooperating teachers, if our pre-service teachers went into a classroom where the cooperating teacher never had their students talk to each other, the first time they tried reciprocal style, the pre-service teachers were like, they didn't know what to do. I couldn't get them to do this. I don't know. And it's like, that's a huge limitation we faced in pre-service teacher development. If the context is not suited to try one of these styles, they are confronting it for the first time that the K-12 learners have ever seen maybe inclusion or reciprocal or been asked questions or to share feedback with one another. Self-check is another one that our K-12 students just don't seem to be confronted with. And so when pre-service teachers try it and it's not successful right away, I think they can kind of feel like maybe it doesn't work, but that's really a contextual barrier.
Okay, thank you very much then all for the interesting presentations and discussion. It's always nice leaving or closing a session with some questions in mind, just to have an interest for our following sessions, and our discussion will continue, of course. Last minute question from anybody or comment? Mark?
Kelly and Kanae, nicely done. Both presentations today were great. Any plan to follow up with these teachers to see what happens to the spectrum in the future for them?
Kanae, you go first.
Well, we've been discussing a lot of potentials, because we found that, like Kerry said, these 4 things that we will need to follow. So again, we have to discuss more, but we'll definitely be talking.
I know at our program, we're going to do a few follow-ups and especially as it relates to the models. I've talked a lot about that, but I also know she has a lot of interest in following how it's going to help them in other areas of teaching, like promoting social justice, promoting personal and social development. So I think we're going to try to track their experiences at least into next year and potentially into their first year of teaching to see what those experiences have translated to.
Excellent. Good.
Okay, thank you very much then all. To be continued. Have a nice weekend, you all, and see you again, hopefully, in our next session